for the rich heritage of this province as found in our people. We pray that native-born Albertans and those who have come from other places may continue to work together to preserve and enlarge the precious heritage called Alberta. Amen.
Introduction of visitors.
Mr. Speaker, it's with great pleasure I introduce to you, sir, and to members of this Assembly, a member of the Legislative Assembly of the province of Alberta. It's Mr. Ed Connery, who's the PC MLA for the riding of Portage-la-Prairie. He is seated for Manitoba. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. I know there's expansive plans in the way, but he's accompanied today by his wife, Beverly, and I would ask that the Assembly welcome this colleague from a sister province.
Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills. Tabling returns and reports.
Mr. Speaker, in response to an exchange between the Minister of Environment and myself Tuesday, July the 22nd, where he asked me to prove my statement that he and not TransAlta Utilities was in charge of the Bighorn Dam, I tabled the original 1960 document between the forerunner of TransAlta, Calgary Power, and the Minister of the day, which says on page 18, however, that to meet an emergency, the Minister may require the company to release and retain water at the Brazeau Storage and Power Development such times and such qualities as he may required in the opinion of the Minister to alleviate the emergency. Okay.
Under honourable member, the customary procedure is just the tabling, which you now have accomplished. Thank you.
Understood. I had one sentence, and I'll admit it was as long as Diefenbaker's, but it was a sentence. Also with the document, first document is a 6-page appendix, Mr. Speaker, which also reiterates the fact the Minister is in charge, and I submit these as the proof that the Minister of Environment and not Calgary Power is in charge of that dam, and 4 copies.
No argument in the House. Thank you, gentlemen. Further?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to table today the Government of Alberta's official reply to the Government of Canada's final report, Inquiry on Federal Water Policy. And while I'm on my feet, perhaps I could just make mention to the member from West Loch Sturgeon that I think I tabled that report 2 months ago.
The regular.
We didn't hear it. If we did, he didn't read it.
Introduction of special guests.
Speaker, I would like to introduce to you and through you to the Assembly a visiting freelance writer, Peter von Stackelberg, who also shares my interest in environmental issues and I've heard doesn't even mind Denmark this time of year. I would ask that he rise in the gallery and that the House accord him the usual warm welcome.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to introduce to you and through you to members of this Assembly 2 school trustees from the county of Parkland, Mrs. Margaret Miller and Mrs. Margaret McNary, who are situated in the members' gallery. I would ask that they rise and receive the traditional warm welcome of this Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, it's my privilege today to introduce a visitor from Graham Prairie, one of the movers and doers, makers and shakers, Mr. John Simpson.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased today to introduce through you to members of the Assembly, members of the Alberta Women's Institute. They're in the members' gallery, and I'd ask them to rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Speaker. I'd like to introduce to you and through you to the members of the Assembly an individual from the City of Calgary who has a long record of community involvement and is, besides that, is a very respected lawyer in the City of Calgary. His name is John McCarthy, and he's seated in the Members Gallery, and I'd ask Mr. McCarthy to rise and receive the recognition of the gallery.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct the first question to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, the Premier seems to have done a lot of speculating outside of the Assembly lately, so we're going to see if we can get some answers in the House about what's going on, Mr. Speaker. Could the Premier tell the Assembly what Crown corporations the government is considering selling?
Mr. Speaker, it would be a review of all the Crown corporations before any decisions were made as to which ones might be sold.
Well, supplementary question, Mr. Speaker, to follow up then so we don't misquote the Premier here. Is there any Crown corporation that the government is not prepared to sell?
Mr. Speaker, at this stage I would much prefer to stay with my original answer, which is that we'll review them all and then make a decision.
Well, supplementary question to try to determine the policy that the government might look at then. In terms of general policy on sale of Crown corporations, is the government's goal to try and unload money losers like AMHC, even if it means assets are undervalued, or is it to try and scoop out some of the easy cash from money makers like AGT? What is the policy?
Mr. Speaker, again, I would much prefer that the honourable member was satisfied with my first answer.
I always appreciate the Premier's answers. They're always so straightforward, and we learn so much. But, Mr. Speaker, to look at one specifically, and it reminds me, Mr. Speaker, of the alcoholic who considers selling his house in order to pay for a case of gin. But my question is specifically with AGT, because of the non-answer. I take it then that the government is considering selling AGT. Or if not, I'll ask the Premier this so we get it clarified. What assurances can the Premier give Albertans that Alberta Government Telephones, which provides excellent service and is generally quite profitable, is not on the selling block and no consideration is being given to selling all or part of it?
Mr. Speaker, again, I would say that we will review all of the Crown corporations, all of them, before making a decision on which ones might be sold.
Member for Westlock Sturgeon, supplementary question.
Mr. Speaker, it's a little disturbing to hear that AGT may be on the auction block. Could the Premier at least give the House the assurance that if any of the Crown corporations are sold, it'll be done by open competitive bidding?
Mr. Speaker, as the honourable leader of the honourable member for Westlock Sturgeon knows, having been in business, that sometimes you can dispose of things in that way, and other times they must be negotiated in different ways, and therefore some Crown Corporation sale might not be able to be sold on an open competitive bid, although in every case, naturally, you would want to obtain the best possible price for any asset which you're prepared to sell.
Member for Clover Bar.
Speaker, the Honourable Premier, in the assessment of looking at the sale of some of these Crown corporations, or all of them, is the Minister or the Premier and the Cabinet giving consideration to making sure that if we go that route, Mr. Speaker, that Albertans will have first choice and possibly be the only possible buyers of Crown corporations belonging to Albertans?
Well, Mr. Speaker, you can't make that kind of a commitment in advance. It is a good condition to look at in every case, but you can't make it in advance on such a wide variety of Crown corporations. I was thinking, Mr. Speaker, myself, of trying for a liquor store.
Speaker.
Second
That's
main question, Leader of the Official Opposition.
investment with a conservative government, Mr. Speaker. My question, Mr. Speaker, has to do with some more musings from Don. We could go on this every day. It has to do with possible provincial support for the Syncrude expansion. Mr. Speaker, it seems that spokespeople for Syncrude itself didn't seem to know over the weekend what the government was talking about with this trial balloon. But my question is to the Premier, beyond discussion of what to do with the $85 million in engineering funding the government found during the election, are there in fact talks currently occurring with Syncrude about the expansion project?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition must refresh his memory to the fact that there are two expansions that Syncrude have been discussing. One is the large expansion of some $4.5 billion. That expansion is the one which the government has contributed on a loan basis $85 million to allow the engineering leading up to construction decision to go ahead, because we believe it's so important to Canada and Alberta for future supplies. The second expansion is a less aggressive one, but nevertheless significant expansion, referred to as the capital projects expansion. And that expansion has been delayed and to some extent put off or stretched out because of the current prices of energy. And so there are both of those that we have had discussions with representatives of either Syncrude or the companies who own shares in Syncrude.
Well, supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. Other than just giving away huge sums of money at a time we have a huge deficit in this province, how is it possible to make the expansion viable in the current pricing environment without some guarantee of a minimum price for the product?
Nobody's talking about giving anything away, Mr. Speaker, and the Honourable Leader of the Opposition perhaps doesn't understand all the gives and takes of risk and reward, but there are ways to figure these things out.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we certainly do understand Tory rewards. It's giving away the public purse to every multinational that comes around.
That's right.
Mr. Speaker, my question to try to get some answers from the Minister, or from the Premier, is simply this, and will the Minister and the Premier, to try to find out a little more about it, is there any interest, because we're told they're also discussing it with the federal government, is there any interest from the federal government on this possible Syncrude expansion, or is it the case that we're going to have to go it alone even with our huge deficit?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, I wouldn't get into details of discussions with the federal government in this regard, but I make it very clear to all the people of Alberta that this government is committed to the development of their oil sands. And if people are unable to see the wisdom, intelligence of that, then we may have to do it alone.
Let's follow up. The cupboard is bare, but we still talk big, don't we, Mr. Speaker? But the question then, too, because of the Premier's answer, there's got to be a limited amount of money. We were told by the Treasurer that we're in serious times. We're going to debate $5.5 billion that we're going to have to borrow, Mr. Speaker. And my question to the Premier is, what is the ceiling which the government has established for the amount of money it is willing to expend on this expansion project?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition has proven once again he does not understand the matter of risk-reward investment. The difference between investing in the future of this province or spending, as he refers to it. When you invest, Mr. Speaker, you end up getting a return. You aren't spending something, you're investing in the future of this province. It pays back in huge dividends to the people of this province.
Supplementary question, Westlock Sturgeon.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I'm a little, I think, many taxpayers a little worried about the Premier's mega project fantasies. But Has he done any, and I know he likes risk and reward, but the taxpayers' risk and Esso's reward is really not what we're after. Has he done any cost-benefit analysis on the oil industry to see where the most jobs are created and the best long-term returns to the people of Alberta come from when distinguishing between tar sands or heavy oil or the conventional oil industry? Three very important sectors, but competitive, and would he spread the money around a little bit? Has he done a cost-benefit analysis on which is the best area?
Mr. Speaker, from time to time there are efforts made to determine which per barrel has the greatest job creation effort. But the honourable member should be clear as well that the resources of this province, whether they be heavy oil or synthetic crude oil from the oil sands or conventional oil, this government is committed to the development of all of those resources because they are so important to the people of this province and the people of Canada.
Member for Clover Bar.
Mr. Speaker, in the Premier's statement that the government supports the development of the heavy oil sands, and I concur with that, Mr. Premier. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of the Environment. Several years ago, I asked the former Minister, the Honourable Jack Cookson, what studies the Department of Environment has done in the Fort McMurray area and downwind to find out what the limitation is as to the number of tar sands plants we can develop in the Fort McMurray area before we endanger our neighbors downwind with acid rain.
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, I didn't quite get the gist of the question.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, to the Honourable Minister, has the department done an assessment as to how many plants we can develop in the Fort McMurray area with the present technology as to the amount of sulfur dioxide that goes in the air? How many plants are we limited to developing so we don't cause an acid rain problem to our neighbors downwind?
Put it up high.
Mr. Speaker, as a
Please.
Mr. Speaker, in terms of the major acid deposition report that was tabled in the House earlier this session, there seemed to be no major concern from Alberta Environment with respect to the possibility of enhanced acid rain or acid deposition in that northeastern part of the province of Alberta or the northwestern part of the province of British Columbia. And as a former board member who represented, I guess, the government of Alberta on that plan for several years, I simply would like to say that this whole business was a major priority concern of the Syncrude Board of Directors.
Main question, Leader of the Liberal Party.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, this is to the Honourable Treasurer. Sorry, Mr. Speaker, I am fumbling my papers here a bit here. Mr. Speaker, the Premier, to the Treasurer, said last Friday that his government will not be encroaching upon the principle of the Heritage Trust Fund. This is a critical statement given the state of the fund and the pressure that a desperate government could put on it. Now, to the Treasurer, how can we not be spending out of the principle of the fund? How can we not be eroding the principle this year when $405 million is going into it? $644 million is coming out, being spent according to the Treasurer's June 16th budget. How are we not eroding the principle?
Mr. Speaker, the concept of using the Heritage Savings Trust Fund to support the general revenue, I think, is one which could deserve some explanation. And that is that within the Heritage Savings Trust Fund, there are a variety of income flows or income streams which can be used. And when we talk about the capital, Mr. Speaker, we're talking about reducing the value of the fund below the year-over-year balance. And it's not our intention, first of all, to encroach upon that in capital. Yet it is reasonable, I think, Mr. Speaker, given the shortfall of revenue in the General Revenue Fund and the need to have some eye on the size of the deficit, that we do use the stream of income from the Heritage Fund into the General Revenue Fund. And that stream is generally made up of the income from income-producing assets within the Heritage Fund. And that has been the way in which we've transferred money, Mr. Speaker, from the Heritage Fund into the General Revenue Fund. And part of that income stream does include the earnings on the income-producing assets and the cash flow or the royalties which are received from the General Revenue Fund back into Revenue Fund again. So, Mr. Speaker, we're not reducing the size of the fund year over year. We're maintaining the capital portion of the fund, and we will use the income flows to, as I've indicated before, support the general revenue fund.
You made a mistake. Yes, Mr. Speaker, you are transferring all the interest to the operating revenue. It's not coming out, but this is out of the principal we're talking about. Now, we're talking about $240 million that's disappeared. All right, then. Is the $405 million of resource revenues destined for the Heritage Trust Fund this year a realistic projection, since it is based upon 15% of the total resource revenues to the province, a number which the budget clearly overestimates? What's your latest projection? Do you still think $405 million?
It is a reasonable estimate, Mr. Speaker.
I like the Treasurer's panache, or gall, some people would call it, but the Treasurer, Mr. Speaker, is considering transferring no resource revenue into the fund next year, and the fund is not allowed to retain its present investment income. Does this mean that spending out of the Heritage Trust Fund account next year must come from the capital of the fund itself?
No, Mr. Speaker.
It is difficult to pin down, Mr. Speaker. Can the Treasurer tell the Assembly whether he plans to cut spending for the 87-88 year from the Heritage Trust Fund altogether? Was the Premier, for instance, confused when he said in the House last Friday that there were no plans to take money out of the fund itself?
Mr. Speaker, it's a crystal clear policy. There's no doubt in most Albertans' mind what is meant. If you've had a chance to read the fund, Mr. Speaker, you'll see exactly how it's set up. I must say that I apologize for not having an annual statement ready at this point. We are in the process of printing the updated annual statement that will be available, and there's a nice graphic form there, Mr. Speaker, which the honourable member from Sturgeon can look at and see how the flow of funds takes place.
Member for Edmonton Norwood, supplementary.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, when the trust fund was set up, there was sort of two main goals, as I understand it. One was the SOC mentality, saving for a rainy day. The other was diversification. With the deficits we're facing, could the Treasurer tell us what is the philosophy of the government in regard to the trust fund now?
Mr. Speaker, the Philosophy Trust Fund essentially is fitted within the broad policy that we have articulated over the past 10 years with respect to its future. Some of the items which should be considered to be priorities in that discussion and that policy formation would be those that are spelt out in the legislation. That is, first of all, to generate a savings fund to set that money aside for the general revenue flow so that the burden of future deficits is not transferred inordinately to the people of Alberta. Secondly, to ensure that there's an income flow from the resources of the Heritage Savings Trust Fund, and that income flow can be used for a variety of purposes. Those purposes must include, Mr. Speaker, first of all, the diversification of the economy of the province of Alberta, unusual projects which have long-lasting benefits to the future of Alberta, including such things as research, scholarships, irrigation, medical research in particular. Those are some of the items which would be in that diversification element. And, Mr. Speaker, finally, to ensure that we do have an ample opportunity to use the non-renewable resources which are depleting in this province over a longer period of time, not necessarily to match the use of the funds with the drawdown of the pool of assets, of the pool of resources themselves, but to have a smoothing process over a longer period of time. It is that good management plan, Mr. Speaker, which we are identifying, which we have gone to the people on a variety of times, and which is a keystone of the provincial government's policy with respect to its fiscal management side.
The member for Calgary Mountain View, followed by the member for Edmonton Meadowlark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Recreation and Parks. On August the 1st, my New Democratic colleague from Edmonton Highlands raised a concern in the Assembly about awarding the potential or possibility of the official film record going to, for the 88 Olympics, going to an American TV network, not an Alberta firm. Now, just this last weekend, we've learned that the OCO, the Olympic Committee, is about to finalize an award of the largest and most expensive sculpture of the Games to two French artists. Can the Minister explain what steps he's taken to make sure this decision is reconsidered so that the Commission goes to some of our excellent Alberta artists or Canadian artists instead of sculptors from another country?
Well, specifically, Mr. Speaker, the member for Calgary Mountain View has asked specifically what steps will the minister take. Well, the minister will not be involving himself personally because I believe in the the autonomous support of the committee that made those decisions, and I'm sure that they have reviewed all potential candidates before making that decision. I certainly will apprise myself of it and see if they have done that. I would undertake to that degree, but as far as reversing a decision, I would not be prepared to do so.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. The minister stated in a letter to my colleague for Highlands, as a result of her raising that past issue in this Assembly, that the Alberta government has developed an understanding with OCO 88 that all projects within reason would be offered publicly, and that OCO 88 would give first priority to Alberta and Canadian firms, all things being equal. Could the minister tell the Assembly if he or his staff, any of his staff, or the provincial government representatives on OCO spoke to the OCO committee to ensure that Alberta content was being upheld in regard to artistic works?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not aware personally that any of our staff were involved in that, and as it would really fall under the Minister responsible for culture, I would refer the question directly to him.
Mr. Speaker, earlier this afternoon I had a chance to talk to Mr. Pratt of the Olympic Committee and other officials with respect to the sculpture in particular. As the Minister of Recreation has indicated, we don't have a direct role to play, but I did express to him my feeling that it was most unfortunate that they had not found an Alberta or Canadian artist to do the sculpture, and I asked him to consider in every way possible that position and the need for Canadian and in particular Alberta artists to be recognized in that particular instance and in all other future ones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The provincial government is represented on the OCO Executive Committee by a number of individuals. Are those individuals under instructions by the provincial government to make or to give first priority to Alberta and Canadian firms, all things being equal, when they vote on matters of this nature?
I'd be pleased to take that under advisement and report back to the member specifically.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my final supplementary, I understand the official name for this yet unbuilt sculpture is going to be called Pig in a Poke. In terms of awarding this particular project to Canadians, can the minister assure the House that Canada does have artists of an international or world-class caliber that are perfectly capable of carrying out this particular work of art?
You bet. Mr. Speaker, once again, the question should be related to my colleague, the honourable member, with regards to the culture, but yes, I'm sure there's lots of qualified artists, but that decision was made, and the Olympics, remember, is a worldwide situation, and I'm sure that was considered. But perhaps the member would like to supplement.
Mr. Speaker, with respect to art, of course, the judgments are always subjective, but it's my personal opinion that we have artists of great renown in the country and in the province who personally would have been satisfactory to me in any such function. As the Minister of Parks and Recreation has indicated, we don't have a direct involvement, but I did express to the officials this morning my belief that Alberta and Canadian artists should be considered first and foremost in their selections. I should mention that the officials mentioned to me that their volunteer committee, headed by Jane Edwards, did review the situation, went through about 120 different artists and concluded that the best was the Paris artist. I would probably come to a far different conclusion, but that is the circumstance as it currently exists.
The member for Calgary-McCall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to direct the supplementary to the Minister of Parks and Recreation and/or Culture. As the City of Calgary is the host city for the Games, and the contractual obligation is there between the city and the International Olympic people, is this not a decision for this development of OCO and the City of Calgary, and that it is being considered by the City of Calgary today in Council and should not be a part of the consideration of the Government of Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, with respect to that, the officials did in fact indicate to me that they were going directly from my conversation with them to council chambers, where they would offer the sculpture that they had to the City of Calgary. I haven't been apprised of that vote, if it may have been taken by now in the City of Calgary, but it will be up to them whether they reject or accept this particular offer. The guess as to the outcome of that vote would probably be better made by the member for Calgary Mountain View, who has more intimate knowledge of that council.
The member for Clover Bar, supplementary or main question? Main question. Sorry, honourable member. There's a supplementary from the ranks of the Liberal Party, Calgary Buffalo, then the member for Clover Bar, followed by the member for Edmonton Meadowlark.
Up to the Minister of Culture, Mr. Speaker. Has the government commissioned itself, or is it considering commissioning any works of art by Alberta artists to commemorate the occasion of the Olympics?
Mr. Speaker, no, the Alberta government hasn't, and to the best of my knowledge, hasn't at this point any plans. Its involvement is through the Olympic Committee in terms of funding and involvement, not directly through the Department of Culture. We do, however, and have encouraged the committee to involve Alberta artists, and in the case of the multicultural organizations, such organizations, in all aspects of their plans.
Member for Clover Bar, followed by the member for Edmonton Meadowlark.
Mr. Speaker, my question is the Honourable Minister of the Environment, but I'd like to say before that, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Culture, that the last time we got Olympics and French engineers mixed up, it cost the taxpayers $1 billion. So I'd like to say the
member, the chair did offer in the previous question if you wanted to ask a supplementary, so let us please go to the main question.
Trying to save $1 billion. Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of the Environment, can the Minister of the Environment inform the Assembly as to the status of the Bradbury chemical application and the development of the site east of Fort Saskatchewan for the new chemical plant? Have there been any changes in the last week as to the siting of that proposed plant?
Not that I'm aware of, Mr. Speaker. We have the application that basically came forward to us under the Clean Water Act, and the last time a question was asked in this matter, I'd indicated that I would be corresponding with the Federal Minister of Agriculture to attempt to get a status on the chemicals in question, and such letter has been sent. There's nothing further to add than that, other than I understand the official position of the NDP party has changed on this matter, and they're now supportive of the application for Bradbury Chemical.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not interested in what the NDP's position is. I'm asking the Minister, will there be an opportunity, or is the Minister still considering having an environmental impact study as to the impact of this plant on the community?
Well, absolutely, Mr. Speaker. That's already been announced. The decision by myself to call for an environmental impact assessment was announced the morning after the application was received by Bradbury Chemicals.
Speaker, can the Minister indicate if any dates for public interest groups or public forums are going to be held in the area?
Under the arrangement and under the guidelines and the policy setting forth environmental impact assessment, it's up to the proponent to basically get back with a document, to advertise locally that such a document is present, and to advertise as well when such public information hearings and meetings would be scheduled and available. When the environmental impact assessment that the proponent will write and pay for is ready, they will also have to provide it to Alberta Environment for a scrutiny and phrase-by-phrase analysis of it.
Clover Bar, supplementary, Westlock Sturgeon.
To the Minister of the Environment, has he gone so far as to approve the disposal of hazardous waste on site, or will it be going to the Swan Hills plant? Have we gone that far yet on the proposal?
Well, Mr. Speaker, until we give an approval for Bradbury Chemical to get a license to operate, that would appear to be rather hypothetical. I don't know at the moment whether or not Alberta Environment and the Government of Alberta will be in a position until we get all the information that's required with respect to this application to determine whether or not the firm will be allowed to operate in Alberta.
Final supplementary, member for Edmonton Glengarry.
Thank you. First, I'd like to state my position hasn't changed, and I'm surprised the minister...
That's entirely out of order. Order, please, honourable member. This is a supplementary question. Please proceed with the question.
Thank you. Considering that Mr. Heen has already announced that he plans major expansions once this very modest proposal goes ahead, will the minister guarantee that environmental impact assessments will also be required on any significant changes within the plant and any significant expansions of the plant?
I think, Mr. Speaker, that once again we had better await to see whether or not the current application is going to be one that will be accepted for licensing and operating in the province of Alberta.
Member for Edmonton Meadowlark, followed by the member for Edmonton Glengarry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Albertans are facing a deficit of $3.5 billion, unprecedented unemployment, and the lowest growth rate in Canada next year. I get 2 sentences. The government responds with an eclectic range of ideas, from the Heritage Savings and Trust Fund revenue to mega project expenditure to Crown Corporation ideas which have to be thought out properly. To the Premier, is the government not saying, in effect, that the economic assumptions upon which the Treasurer's last 2 budgets were based have changed so dramatically that a new provincial budget is required immediately, not now, but right now?
No, Mr. Speaker, the government isn't saying that.
I wonder if they know what they are saying. Can the Treasurer tell this Assembly what his estimate of the deficit is today, today's estimate, since the underlying assumptions have to have changed, particularly with respect to resource revenues?
Speaker, we stand by the estimates which were tabled June 16th.
To the Premier, whose Treasurer loses all kinds of credibility when he answers like that, the assumptions have to have changed dramatically. Why then do we have to wait until 1987 for a more realistic budget based on more realistic assumptions? Is not an interim budget called for right now?
No, Mr. Speaker, it's not.
Will the Premier recall the legislature before Christmas, if not for the presentation of a new budget, at least for a special debate of the province's current budgetary situation? We have to be discussing that right now.
If I understand the honourable member's proposal, it is to shut down the House and come back again before Christmas in order to discuss another budget. That's not our intention, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Edmonton Norwood.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, it seems to us that, that the worst-case scenario that the Treasurer has talked about is true. We would need, for the budget to work out, $24 per barrel. How can the Treasurer tell us that his estimates from the previous budget are in that range of time? Everybody in Alberta knows that's false. How can he justify it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, again, the honourable member from Norwood has focused on one amount. We have from time to time have indicated that we are using a 1/3 reduction in all revenues to the province that come from natural resources, including land sales, gas sales, and a variety of other items. And I think fairly at this point, Mr. Speaker, that assessment is as good as any. Certainly, we did not hang our hat on a number, as the member of Norwood has just done.
Member for Edmonton Glengarry, followed by the member for Edmonton Avonmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After a meeting with the Council and Mayor of Oyen, I've come to the conclusion that they have very legitimate concerns about their water supply, and that problem has been an ongoing source of serious concern and frustration for years. So to the Minister of Community and Occupational Health, I'd like to ask, has the Minister personally studied the danger to community health that is embodied in this water problem, and is he therefore urging the appropriate minister to find a solution to this problem?
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the question by the honourable member, but I can quite frankly say that I have not received that information, and if he'd care to make it available to me, I would go to work on it.
Thank you. That would be my pleasure later today. To the Minister in charge of Public Safety Services, in view of how big a small fire can become when there's no water to put it out, has the Minister taken this factor into consideration in choosing which of the 14 alternatives from this government study he will eventually go ahead with? And that's the Oyen-Youngstown Corridor Water Supply Study.
A wide variety of inputs are being received with respect to this, including a meeting that I'll be having in the Oyen area, hopefully in the next several weeks, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. To the Treasurer, we've heard much talk about cost cutting. Has the Treasurer done, or has he had the Minister of Environment do a comparative study of the cost to the province in finding a permanent solution to this problem as compared to the ongoing Band-Aid solution of trucking water and digging more hundreds of wells?
Speaker, that's not within my range of responsibilities, and other ministers who have spoken already have indicated that they're on top of the issue.
The people of Oyen are incredulous to hear that. To the Premier, can the Premier assure that a solution will be found and that construction will begin no later than next spring so that the residents and town councils of Oyen and nearby communities can be assured of a dependable water supply?
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure, and I would confirm, that we will work with the people of Oyen and the surrounding area. It's not just a matter for the town of Oyen, to work out the best possible solution for them working together.
Member for Edmonton Avamore, followed by the member for Edmonton Gold Bar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Premier, on August 26th, the Premier promised me, as head of this government, that he would investigate and report back to me and this Assembly as to why this government is giving money to manpower, occupational health, and education departments to the educational offshoot of the Church of Scientology. What is the Premier's report on this matter?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thought that had been dealt with by another minister already in the House.
Not to my satisfaction. To the Minister of Social Services, it now appears that the Social Services Department may also be providing funding to the Church of Scientology, in particular in their offshoot Education Alive through a daycare operated by GVK Enterprises. Why is Social Services also making grants to the Scientologists?
Mr. Speaker, we have no evidence that the Church of Scientology is operating a daycare or a family day home. The programming that is in place is programming that is acceptable right across the province. It's been thoroughly monitored. If the honourable member has specific information that someone is being trained in a different way to present a different philosophy, that the honourable member believes that as a government we should strike out in all of Alberta, I'd be very interested in hearing that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In August, the Minister's Department closed the Family Day Home Servicing section of JVK Enterprises due to the potential of fraud by the Centre in regards to funds received for services provided. Will the Minister be introducing any new monitoring requirements to ensure a similar type of abuse does not occur in the future?
Mr. Speaker, I find that supplementary question to be a rather odd one in light of the question that was originally asked. We're now getting into the administration and monies flowing from government and not the educational program at all. But, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member certainly has been in the House when on a number of occasions I have said that I am addressing in an administrative sense the whole area of how funds go and how we can assure that they are being properly spent.
Thank you. Final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm convinced that the monitoring is of sufficient quality. I'm wondering how the Minister is monitoring the services and the programs within daycares to ensure that the kind of abuses that we hear about are not in fact occurring.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure what kind of abuses the honourable member is speaking to, but I think that she has already raised a question about a particular organization that in fact is under review at this moment. We have taken over to make sure that the services are still available to the public. Bank robbery is also against the law. I guess it's unfortunate to say that we get into situations where people, human beings, commit some kind of a misdemeanor that may in fact be against a provincial law. They are then investigated. The honourable member's already raised that.
Thank you. The member for Edmonton Gold Bar, followed by the member for Edmonton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Premier.
In June of 1985, Mr. Speaker, the Court of Queen's Bench heard a notice of motion on behalf of the Canadian Mental Health Association declaring that sections of the current Mental Health Act are inconsistent with the Charter of Rights. That motion was later delayed on the strength of commitments from the Attorney General's Department and of the then Minister of Health, and I believe an understanding from the Premier himself prior to the election that new legislation would be tabled in the spring of 1986. This legislation has not yet been introduced. What's the reason for the delay in introducing this new legislation, and when on earth can we expect to see the new Mental Health Act?
Mr. Speaker, it is a very important piece of legislation, one that has received a great deal of attention and work throughout the province, as the honourable member would know, I believe, and that as soon as we have it in a form that can be presented to the House, it will.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I'm glad to hear it. Will the new Act, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, make provision for the individual to be fully informed of the reasons for his detention and his right to legal counsel?
Mr. Speaker, like any piece of legislation, you shouldn't anticipate the details of it, else we'd be debating it before the bill's before the House. I'd only say that we would make sure the bill is as full and complete as possible and would listen with interest if there are any deficiencies in it that could be changed that are raised by members of the legislature.
Mr. Speaker, will the Act ensure that treatment requires the consent of the individual?
Mr. Speaker, the same answer. I'm not sure you're referring to O'Shane, if you wish me to answer this or not again.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're waiting for the Act, and people are very anxious and want to know, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, what on earth we can expect to get in this Act. We need to know, for instance, Mr. Speaker, if the Act will provide, and I've asked this one before, for local treatment of involuntary patients in properly designated general hospitals.
We'll stick around.
Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, it's the same matter she's raising, one particular clause from a very complex, important piece of legislation, and we should surely wait until the bill's been introduced. Now, the Honourable Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care may well wish to supplement my answer.
Mr. Speaker, if I might add to the Premier's comments on the last question, the matter of treatment of involuntary patients in active treatment hospitals in this province has been dealt with at some length in the legislature during the course of the last few weeks, and it has little or nothing to do with whether or not a new Mental Health Act is introduced into the legislature. The existing Mental Health Act has all of the requirements that are necessary to move toward the treatment or the admission of involuntary patients in existing active treatment hospitals. I outlined to the legislature some weeks ago a proposed schedule of moving certain hospitals in Edmonton and Calgary and other regional centres into a stage of being able to receive involuntary patients over the course of the next 3 fiscal years. The Department of Hospitals and Medical Care are working now with those hospitals in an effort to try to ensure that they can come on stream as quickly as possible in that category. But I repeat again, Mr. Speaker, it has nothing whatever to do with the requirement for a new Mental Health Act.
Final supplementary, Edmonton Gold Bar. Thank you. Member for Clover Bar.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Health, is there any consideration being given to bringing the bill in for first reading before the session rises now and hold it over so we have more public input and give some consideration, and bring it back for discussion in the spring session?
Mr. Speaker, as the Premier has indicated and the line of questioning has indicated, there are several very important principles with respect to a new Mental Health Act that involve constitutional matters as well as rights of the patient, and there are differing points of view as to how those important matters can be resolved. I'm in the process of trying to come to some conclusions that will allow us to put together legislation that could then be put into the House. But at the present time, there is no legislation drafted, and we're not able to introduce a bill until we've had some further opportunity for discussion on at least 3 aspects of the Act that there are no easy answers for.
Member for Calgary Mountain View.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care, in view of the fact that the Drury Report was tabled 3 years ago and the changes to the Charter of Rights have occurred 3 years ago, and is the Minister saying that that the present Act is not going to be amended in any significant way? Or is he saying that a new Act is in fact going to be introduced within the next 6 months or before the spring session is concluded?
Well, there is always a possibility, Mr. Speaker, that we could provide some sort of a draft act when the session isn't sitting for review, if we're able to get it concluded and into that sort of shape. But my preference would be to table an act in the legislature for first reading. And as I've said earlier, I don't believe that is possible to do over the next short while, but certainly we're working hard on it. And when we've concluded studying all of the issues involved and are able to finalize the drafting of the Act, we'll make it public as quickly as we're able to, preferably through the legislature.
Time for question period has expired. 2 ministers wish to supplement information given previously to the House. First, the Minister of Transportation and Utilities, related to last Friday. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, on Friday last, the honourable member from Westlock Sturgeon asked a series of questions related to the billing processes of ICG, and I have some answers that I hope will clarify the situation. ICG is in the process of changing from volume billing, that's cubic feet or cubic meters, to energy billing, British thermal units, BTUs or gigajoules. Most of the Alberta gas utilities have already made the change, and the reason for the change is that a given volume of gas contains a variable heat value, that's a BTU or a gigajoule, depending on the well it comes from, and thus energy billing is a fairer way of billing the consumer. The specific questions, Mr. Speaker, were, can the Minister guarantee that energy value readings based on samplings will be published on each customer bill? And the response is that ICG proposed to take monthly readings of the gas energy content on a sampling basis, and that the company intends to show on the bill the average megajoule content per cubic meter for the gas in the area in which the customer is located. The second question was, is ICG buying gas on an energy value basis since it sells that way? And the response is yes, ICG buys gas on an energy value basis. The next question is the PUB contemplating a province-wide standard of energy value calculation, and the response is that all natural gas sold in Alberta, and in fact throughout Canada, is sold under standard conditions of atmospheric pressure and temperature established under the Federal Electricity and Gas Inspection Regulations administered by the Federal Department of Consumer and Corporate Affairs, and the PUB does not set a standard for energy value calculations, but the PUB ensures that the gas utility conforms to those standards with respect to the price charged customers for natural gas. The last question was from the member from Athabasca-Lac-La-Biche. Will the Minister contact ICG regarding 40,000 consumers being billed an extra $1? In checking with ICG, normally ICG have a fixed monthly billing charge of $7.50 for residential service. The billing cycle is normally a 30-day basis, but the billing computer is programmed to charge an extra $1 if the billing cycle exceeds 33 days, or deduct $1 if it's less than 27 days. And in one instance, during the February-March of 1985 period, the meter readings for a number of the customers were delayed due to bad weather, and the customers affected were billed the extra $1, and ICG have manually checked about 8,000 customers' bills to date and credits the $1 on the next customer bills. It's intended to complete this analysis for the other 32,000 customers as quickly as possible.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the Minister's answer, and it doesn't get to the point. The point is that the meter reads in cubic feet. A gigajoule or a BTU is the number of heat units within a cubic foot of gas, and it can vary from month to month from whatever they're buying. Now, all I'm asking is that utility companies should, in their billing, say, all right, so many cubic feet, that person can then read it off his meter, times the heat value, what energy value, what they got, equals so many gigajoules. What they're giving you is the answer and the meter, but not telling the multiplier factor, and there's a multiplier factor in between. And you can tell that gentleman I was selling gas when he was still running around in rompers, and I know exactly what he's trying to do.
Debate, honourable members and Minister. The Minister brings back the information. The member that raised the issue gets one chance to ask for additional supplementary information. But indeed, you're right. As I recollect the process, it's up to the... I don't think I've finished, honourable member. For the Minister to continue with his statement in response to the question as raised. Chair apologizes. Minister.
And may I go a little bit further, and I don't think, Mr. Speaker, that... Okay. The other point that I was going to make was the approximate energy value of 1,000 cubic feet of natural gas is 1.05 gigajoules, and this varies from source to source. And then my department said to me, as you know, a gigajoule is 10 to the 9th joules. That's 10 times 10, 9 times. A megajoule is 10 to the 6th joules. That's 10 times 10, 6 times. And a petajoule is 10 to the 15th joules.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for this precious gem of an answer. Point of order, Athabasca Laklabish. It's not appropriate for other members to be asking a question on this topic, just the member that raised the original question. Okay. All right, then, what is the point, Athabasca Laklabish?
Yes, I just want to thank the Minister for checking that ICG monthly billing system, because it was...
Order, honourable member. The Chair appreciates your generosity, but you should send a personal note to the Minister. Thank you. The Chair understands that there is a point of privilege. Member for Edmonton Glengarry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier in today's question period, the Honourable Minister of Environment made a statement with respect to my opinions and my feelings on a certain issue, and that it is factually incorrect and could be detrimental to my ongoing opposition on the matter. I would request respectfully that the Minister withdraw the statement that was based on third-hand information.
Well, as Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think it would be appropriate at this point in time for all members to perhaps look at the blues, because I do not recall mentioning the name member from Glengarry in any comments I made this afternoon.
For point of clarification, the Chair's recollection was it was a reference to the NDP party. It was not to the member for Edmonton Glengarry, but the honourable member one last time on this point of privilege.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I recall, he referred to the New Democrat environment critic, which is myself and...
Honourable member, because we're honourable members, because we're getting to this bit of dialogue back and forth, therefore the Chair instructs for the Minister of the Environment or invites the Minister of the Environment and the member for Edmonton Glengarry to indeed check the blues, and if there is indeed any further basis for any discussion with respect to point of privilege, that the Chair will also invoke Standing Order number 15-2, which means that 2 hours notice before tomorrow's session will be given to the Speaker of the Assembly. Orders of the day.